The town looked away as the sick girl fell. One cowboy ran through the snow to save her. The town of White Pine lay nestled between frozen hills, surrounded by a blanket of snow that stretched as far as the eye could see. The cold wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling windows and sending shivers down anyone brave enough to walk outside. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, but even the warmth of fire could not hide the biting chill that clung to every corner of the town. It was the kind of winter that made people keep their doors shut and their eyes on the ground. Life moved slowly here, with the rhythm of the seasons guiding every action. But that winter, beneath the stillness and the snow, something stirred that would shake the town in ways it had never imagined. At the edge of the town, in a small, weathered house, lived a young girl named Clara. She was no more than 12 years old, with thin, pale arms and eyes that seemed too large for her small face. Her hair, once golden, now hung limp, darkened at the ends from illness and neglect. Clara had always been delicate, and the harsh winters had never been kind to her. But this year, her sickness had grown worse. She coughed often, her chest rattling painfully with every breath. Her mother tried to keep her warm, wrapping her in layers of wool, but even the heaviest blankets could not chase away the chill that clung to her fragile body. Her father had been gone for years, leaving her mother to struggle alone, patching up clothes, fixing fires, and trying to make ends meet in a town that seemed to care little for their plight. Inside their small home, the wind found every crack in the walls, letting icy fingers creep across the wooden floorboards. Clara lay on a thin mattress in the corner, wrapped in a faded quilt. Her breaths came shallow and quick, each one sounding more like a whisper of life than a steady rhythm. She shivered under the blankets, her small hands clutching the quilt tightly, as though holding it close could keep her alive. Her mother, Mary, knelt beside her, brushing the hair from her forehead, her eyes red from worry and sleepless nights. She whispered soft words, trying to soothe her daughter, but deep down she feared she could do nothing to save her. Beyond the walls of the house, the town carried on, indifferent to the suffering inside. People went about their business, moving from the market to the blacksmith, from the saloon to their homes, wrapped in thick coats and scarves. They knew of Clara's illness, of course. News traveled fast in small towns, and whispers of her worsening condition reached every corner. But the townspeople did what they always did when faced with trouble that was not theirs to bear. They looked away. Some crossed the street to avoid passing her house. Others hurried past with downcast eyes, pretending they hadn't heard the coughs or seen the pale face pressed against the window. Fear and apathy mingled with the cold, creating a barrier no warmth could break. The schoolteacher, Mr. Barlin, had noticed Clara weeks ago. He saw her sitting by the window during lessons, coughing into her sleeve, her tiny frame trembling. He wanted to speak up, to ask the town leaders for help, but each time he thought to act, he hesitated. What could one man do against poverty and sickness in a town that had never shown much concern for the weak? And so, like everyone else, he kept his distance, hoping that someone else would step forward. But no, one did. Inside the small house, Clara's condition worsened with each passing day. Her mother stayed awake at night, watching her chest rise and fall, counting each breath, praying silently that it would not be her last. The fire burned low in the stove, sending little warmth into the room. Mary piled blankets over her daughter, hoping to chase away the cold that seemed to seep into Clara's bones. She fed her small spoonfuls of soup, but Clara's appetite was gone, her strength fading with the light of each day. Mary's heart ached as she held her hand, feeling the slight tremor that told her her daughter's body was giving in. The town's indifference weighed heavily on Mary. She knew that people whispered about her family, about how they struggled, about how they were poor and weak. Some said she was careless, letting her child fall ill. Others avoided her house entirely, afraid that sickness might spread or that they might be asked for help they could not give. Mary understood their fear and their judgment, but it did not lessen her sorrow. She felt the loneliness that comes from fighting for someone's life when the world turns its back. One morning, the snow fell heavier than usual. The wind cut through the town like a blade, and the streets were nearly empty. Mary noticed that Clara's cough had worsened overnight, leaving her breathless and trembling. She tried to lift her daughter from the bed, but Clara's body was too weak. She sank back onto the mattress, eyes wide and frightened. "Mom, I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Mary shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Shh, don't speak, my love. Just rest. I'll be right here." But even as she spoke, fear gnawed at her. She knew that words could not save her daughter. She could not find the medicine, the doctor, or even the hope that seemed so far away in this cold, uncaring town. Meanwhile, outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the streets in white silence. The town remained quiet, the usual bustle replaced by the sound of wind against buildings and the crunch of boots in the snow. People went about their lives, wrapped in their own troubles, unwilling or unable to help. And in the small house at the edge of town, a young girl struggled to survive, each breath a battle, each moment a fight against the cold and the sickness that threatened to take her. Mary sat by the window, watching the snow drift past, hoping for a miracle. She thought of the doctors in the neighboring towns, the people who might care, the strangers who could bring help. But they were far away, and the snow made travel nearly impossible. She felt helpless, trapped in a town that looked away when they needed compassion the most. And then, just as despair settled heavily on her shoulders, she heard the faint sound of hooves in the distance, breaking the silence of the snow-covered streets. Her heart leapt with hope, unsure if it was real or just a wish born of desperation. The sound grew louder, steady and determined, cutting through the winter air. Mary stood, pressing Clara close to her chest, eyes wide with anticipation. She could see a figure approaching, moving through the snow with a purpose that seemed almost impossible against the harsh weather. The figure wore a wide-brimmed hat and heavy coat, his horse trudging through the deep drifts with strength and determination. Mary's heart pounded. Could this be someone who would finally care, someone willing to help when the town had failed? Clara, too weak to move, sensed something different in the air. Her small hand reached out, clutching her mother's sleeve. Her eyes followed the approaching figure, and for the first time in days, a faint glimmer of hope appeared. She could not speak, but she understood that help was coming. The sound of hooves grew closer, each beat echoing like a heartbeat in the snow, a promise that someone had not looked away. The cowboy dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow as he made his way toward the small house. He carried no weapon, no show of force, only a bag slung over his shoulder and the determination in his eyes. He knocked on the door, and Mary hurried to answer, fear and hope tangled together in her heart. The man stepped inside, removing his hat, revealing a face weathered by travel but kind, a presence that immediately felt different from the indifference of the townspeople. "I heard about the girl," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to help." Mary's hand shook as she led him to Clara, her eyes filling with tears. The cowboy knelt beside the bed, assessing the girl's condition quickly but carefully. There was urgency in his movements, a determination that made it clear he would not leave until she was safe. Mary watched, relief mingling with disbelief. For the first time in days, someone had not looked away. Outside, the town continued its quiet routine, unaware of the small miracle unfolding at the edge of the streets. But inside the little house, hope had returned, fragile but undeniable. The girl lay still, weak and pale, but the presence of the cowboy brought a warmth stronger than any fire. He was not part of the town, and he did not judge or hesitate. He simply acted, moving through the snow and the cold, bringing life and care when the world seemed to have forgotten it. And so, in the first part of this story, the stage is set. The town's indifference, the girl's struggle, and the mother's despair all meet the arrival of a man willing to face the snow, the cold, and the danger to save a life. It is a quiet moment, yet full of tension and promise, a turning point that shows how courage and compassion can appear where they are needed most, even in the harshest winter, and even in the coldest hearts. The cowboy stayed by Clara's side, carefully observing her frail condition. He could see the thin lines of illness across her face, the way her chest rose and fell with every shallow breath. He had traveled many roads and faced harsh weather, but nothing prepared him for the sight of such vulnerability. He could feel the cold bite of the winter, but it was nothing compared to the icy weight of helplessness that seemed to hang over the small house. Mary, Clara's mother, hovered nearby, wringing her hands and biting her lips, her eyes full of a mix of hope and fear. She had never met this man before, yet in him she saw the spark of someone who might care more than the rest of the town ever had. The cowboy knelt beside Clara's bed, placing his hands gently on her small frame. "She needs medicine," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "And she needs warmth. We have to get her something stronger than what's here." Mary nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. She had tried everything she could think of, her motherly instincts, homemade remedies, blankets and soups, but the sickness had only grown. She had begun to lose hope, believing that the winter and the town's indifference would take her child. But the cowboy's confidence gave her something she hadn't felt in days: hope. He asked her mother to gather blankets and wrap the girl as warmly as possible. Then he reached into the bag he had carried and pulled out a few basic supplies he had brought with him from the previous towns he passed through. There were bandages, strong teas made from herbs, and some medicine that could ease fever and infection. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to buy time if he could get help quickly. The cowboy moved with precision, tying blankets around Clara's small body, making sure she was warm and her head was supported. He could see that the child's body was weak, barely able to hold itself upright, yet her spirit, though dimmed by sickness, seemed to flicker at the presence of someone who cared. Mary explained the girl's condition, detailing how she had been sick for weeks, how her cough had worsened, and how she hadn't been able to eat properly for days. The cowboy listened carefully, nodding as he absorbed the information. He asked about nearby settlements, about roads that might be passable despite the snow, and about anyone who might be able to help. The town had no doctor close enough to save the girl, and the journey through the snow would be dangerous, even for a man experienced in harsh winters. Yet he did not hesitate. He understood that action, not fear, was what was needed now. "I'll go," he said firmly. "I can get medicine from the next town. There is a doctor there who can help. But we must move quickly." Mary's eyes widened and her hands trembled. "But it's dangerous," she whispered. "The snow is deep, and the wind will cut you. You might not make it." The cowboy shook his head, a determined expression on his face.
"If I don't try, she won't survive. I can't let that happen."
"You stay here, and I will return with help." Mary could only nod, unable to argue with the certainty in his voice. She knew the danger was real, but she also knew that this man might be the only chance her daughter had. Before leaving, he knelt again, speaking softly to Clara. "I'm going to bring someone to help you," he said. "Stay strong for me." "I'll be back soon." The girl's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she gave a weak nod. It was not much, but it was enough to give the cowboy confidence that his effort was worth the risk. He strapped on his coat, checked his boots, and tightened the saddle on his horse. The wind outside had grown sharper, the snow falling faster, but he was ready. He did not think about the cold or the dangers ahead. His mind was focused on the girl, on her life, and the urgent need to act. The journey began with the horse trudging through knee-deep snow, each step a battle against nature. The cowboy's face was set and determined, his eyes scanning the white horizon for the safest path. The wind bit at his cheeks, and flakes of snow clung to his hat and coat, but he did not falter. He had faced storms before, crossed mountains, and braved long nights alone. Yet this journey felt different. Every gust of wind, every snowdrift was a reminder that someone's life depended on his courage and speed. He pushed forward, urging the horse to move faster while carefully watching the ground for hidden obstacles. As he rode, the cowboy thought about the town he had just left behind. How could people ignore someone in need? How could they let a child suffer while they stayed inside their warm homes, pretending nothing was wrong? The thought made him grip the reins tighter. He did not stop to dwell on the town's indifference for long, though. Dwelling would only slow him down. The girl needed him to move, to act, and that was all that mattered now. Each mile he traveled through the snow brought him closer to the next town, and hopefully, to the medicine and help that would save her. Along the way, he encountered obstacles that would have made a lesser man turn back. Trees heavy with snow leaned across the narrow path, threatening to block his way. Frozen streams gleamed under the pale sunlight, their surfaces slippery and fragile. The cold wind roared in his ears, making it difficult to hear even the softest sound. But he persisted. He adjusted the horse's path carefully, guiding it around dangerous spots, using his knowledge of terrain and weather to navigate safely. Every choice, every small decision, was crucial. One mistake could mean he wouldn't return, and the girl would be left behind. He also faced exhaustion, both his own and the horse's. The snow slowed every step, and the cold sapped energy faster than any journey he had made before. Yet he pressed on, offering soft words to his companion and patting its neck when it faltered. The horse understood the urgency in its rider's voice and moved with determination, its hooves breaking through drifts, its breath forming clouds in the icy air. The bond between man and animal was unspoken but strong, each relying on the other to survive the perilous ride. As the hours passed, the landscape became more treacherous. Snowdrifts grew higher, and visibility dropped as the storm intensified. The cowboy slowed the horse when necessary, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his shoulders. He could not afford to fall or lose his way. The girl's life depended on him. He thought of Clara's mother and the fear that must be gripping her heart, of the helplessness she had felt when the town looked away. He could not let her down. The thought of the town's indifference fueled him, giving him the strength to endure the cold and the exhaustion. Finally, after what felt like endless miles, he saw the outline of the next town through the falling snow. Relief surged through him, but he knew the journey was not over. He had to find the doctor, secure the medicine, and return quickly. The snow had slowed him, but now that he had a chance to act, he focused entirely on the task. He guided his horse through the streets, calling out for help, explaining the urgency of the situation to anyone who would listen.
The townspeople here were startled at first, but when they realized the danger to the young girl, they quickly provided what he needed. The doctor, an older man with experience treating winter illnesses, quickly packed the medicine and supplies.
The cowboy thanked him and prepared to leave immediately. There was no time to waste. He knew the storm would worsen, and that Clara's condition could deteriorate at any moment. He mounted the horse once again, clutching the precious supplies, and began the return journey through the snow, determination burning brighter than ever. Each step, each mile, was a race against time. As he rode back toward the small town, the cowboy thought of the girl lying in her home, waiting, trusting, hoping. He imagined her pale face, her cough, and the way her small hands reached out for warmth. The thought drove him forward, giving him strength against the cold and exhaustion. The snow, the wind, and the long miles could not slow him. He was carrying not just medicine, but hope, courage, and the chance for life itself, and he would not fail. The snow had thickened by the time the cowboy began his journey back to the small town where Clara lay sick. Each flake that fell seemed heavier than the last, carried by a bitter wind that cut through the layers of his coat and pricked his skin. He adjusted the blanket over the medicine bag strapped across his saddle and urged the horse forward. The path back was more treacherous than the way out, as the storm had intensified, obscuring familiar landmarks and burying tracks in deep snow. Yet he refused to slow down. He could picture Clara's frail body, the cough that rattled through her small chest, and the thin lines of fever coloring her pale face. Every second counted. The cowboy knew the hazards of winter travel all too well. Snowdrifts could swallow a horse's legs. Icy patches could cause slips that might mean disaster, and hidden branches or uneven ground could turn a simple ride into tragedy. Still, he pressed on, moving steadily, guided by instinct and experience. His breath came in white clouds in the frigid air, and his eyes burned from the cold, but his resolve never wavered. This was no ordinary ride. He carried hope in his hands, the chance to save a life that the town had ignored. The horse plodded forward, muscles straining against the weight of snow, its hooves sinking and breaking the icy crust. The cowboy leaned into the saddle, giving soft commands, patting the horse's neck and occasionally lifting his eyes to search for safe ground. The wind screamed in his ears, and the snow stung his face, but he focused only on the road ahead. Every moment brought him closer to the girl's house and the life he hoped to preserve. As the hours passed, Fatigue began to gnaw at him. His muscles ached, his fingers stiffened in the cold, and each breath felt heavier than the last. He had been riding almost non-stop, yet the thought of turning back was unthinkable. Clara's life depended on his endurance. He gritted his teeth, urging the horse forward with renewed determination. The horse, loyal and resilient, responded with steady steps, seemingly understanding the urgency of the mission. The storm was relentless, but the cowboy's will was stronger. Suddenly the path ahead seemed blocked. A fallen tree lay across the trail, branches thick with snow and ice. The horse stopped, nostrils flaring and ears flicking back nervously. The cowboy scanned the area, searching for a way around. He could not turn back, and time was running out. Carefully he guided the horse along a narrow detour, balancing on the edge of a small ravine hidden beneath the snow. His heart pounded, not from fear of the fall, but from the thought of delay. Clara was waiting, and any setback could cost her life. Inch by inch she maneuvered past the obstacle, careful not to spook the horse or lose his balance. When the path was clear again, he let out a quiet sigh of relief and pressed onward. The snowstorm thickened further, reducing visibility to only a few feet. The world outside had turned white, the outlines of trees, hills, and fences blurred by the endless fall of snow. The cowboy's mind focused solely on the mission. He ignored the bite of the wind and the stinging of his frozen cheeks, thinking only of the girl and her mother and the small home at the edge of the town. He visualized the fire burning low in her room, the blankets that barely kept her warm, and the way her eyes might light up when he returned with help. That image drove him forward, lending strength to his aching body. Hours dragged on, and the storm showed no signs of easing. The cold seeped into his bones, making every movement slower and more laborious. Snow clung to his coat, weighing him down, and ice formed on his gloves, making it harder to hold the reins. Yet he did not falter. He spoke softly to his horse, words of encouragement and praise, as if the animal could understand the weight of their mission. The bond between man and horse was unspoken but vital. Both relied on each other to survive the harsh elements and deliver hope to a waiting child. As he navigated a particularly steep hill, the horse stumbled in the deep snow. The cowboy reacted instantly, leaning forward, gripping the saddle tightly, and urging the animal to regain its footing. The moment was tense, each second stretching as the horse struggled against the snow and the incline. Finally, with a burst of strength, the horse regained balance, and they continued forward, hearts pounding with relief. The cowboy's mind raced with thoughts of Clara. Her life was fragile, hanging by a thread, and he could not afford any more delays. In the midst of the storm, he spotted a small cabin in the distance. Smoke rose from its chimney, a faint promise of warmth and safety. He considered stopping briefly to rest or get directions, but he realized that time was too precious. Every pause could mean the difference between life and death. He continued onward, his eyes scanning the horizon for familiar signs of the town, each drifted fence post or outline of a tree giving him a sense of direction in the otherwise white void. The cold pressed harder, and fatigue threatened to slow him. His fingers were numb, his face red and raw from the wind, and his muscles screamed for rest. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to move, focusing on the destination rather than the pain. Thoughts of Clara's mother kept him moving, imagining the relief and gratitude she would feel when her daughter was saved. That thought was stronger than the storm, stronger than his exhaustion, stronger than fear. It was hope in its purest form, a light he carried through the blinding snow. As night began to fall, the storm continued its relentless assault. Darkness enveloped the landscape, and the snow reflected the faint light, creating a world that seemed both beautiful and perilous. The cowboy's eyes strained to see the path ahead, his mind sharp and focused despite the cold and fatigue. Each mile brought new challenges, hidden ice, deep snow, and fallen branches. But he faced them all with determination. The girl's life was at stake, and he could not falter. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cowboy recognized the familiar outlines of the town. The snow-covered streets were silent, the town itself seeming asleep beneath the storm. But he knew that inside one small house hope and life waited for him. He urged the horse forward, breaking through the last drifts of snow with effort and grit. The closer he came, the stronger the thought of Clara filled him, giving him the energy to continue despite the aching in his legs and back. As he reached the edge of the town, he could see the faint outline of the small house where Clara lay. Smoke curled from the chimney, and he knew her mother would be watching, anxiously waiting for any sign of his return. The final steps of the journey were the hardest, not because of distance or snow, but because of the tension and urgency pressing down on him. He guided the horse carefully, descending the last hill, and finally reached the front of the house. The cowboy dismounted, his boots sinking into the thick snow. He carried the medicine bag in one hand and a small supply of blankets in the other. His face was red and raw from the storm, his body exhausted, but his eyes burned with determination. He knocked on the door, a sound loud and sharp against the quiet of the snowy night. Mary, who had been pacing and watching for hours, rushed to the door. Her eyes widened as she saw him, breathless from hope and fear. Is she okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The cowboy nodded firmly. "I've got the medicine. We can help her now." Relief washed over Mary's face, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe freely. Clara's life, which had seemed so fragile, now had a chance. The cowboy stepped inside, careful not to disturb the girl, and prepared to administer the medicine and warmth she so desperately needed. Inside the small home, the wind howled outside, and snow piled against the walls, but within, hope returned. The cowboy moved quickly and efficiently, checking Clara's pulse, administering medicine, and adjusting blankets to keep her warm. Mary watched, tears streaming down her face, as the child's shallow breaths began to steady. The storm outside was still fierce, but inside, determination and courage had brought light to a place of despair. For hours the cowboy stayed, monitoring Clara's condition and keeping her warm, refusing to rest until he was certain she would survive the night. The town, which had looked away for so long, remained silent outside, but within the small house, life returned. The storm had tested their strength, but courage, determination, and compassion had triumphed over fear and indifference. The snowstorm raged outside, beating against the small windows of the house, but inside, the atmosphere was tense yet hopeful. Clara lay on the bed, bundled in blankets, her tiny body still weak and fragile. The cowboy moved carefully around her, checking the medicine he had brought and administering it as instructed by the doctor he had visited on his journey. Every movement was precise, careful, and filled with urgency. He knew that one small mistake could undo all the effort, that any delay could allow the sickness to take its toll. Mary hovered nearby, clutching her hands together, her eyes never leaving her daughter's pale face. The relief of seeing someone take action mingled with a deep, lingering fear. What if it was too late? The cowboy spoke softly to both of them, explaining what he was doing. "This will help her breathe easier," he said as he adjusted a blanket. "And this medicine will fight the infection. She's strong, but she needs care every hour until the fever passes." Mary nodded quickly, grateful for every word, every action. She watched as the cowboy worked, marveling at his calm confidence, so different from the fear and indifference of the townspeople who had done nothing. For days, she had felt alone, powerless to protect her child. Now, someone had stepped forward when it mattered most. Hours passed slowly. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, but the cowboy remained focused, pacing gently around the room, checking Clara's breathing and monitoring her response to the medicine. He offered words of encouragement to the girl, speaking softly in a calm voice, reminding her to be strong. Even in her fevered state, Clara responded, her small fingers twitching slightly as if acknowledging his presence. The warmth of hope, something she had not felt in weeks, seemed to seep into her pale body, giving her strength in small, steady measures. Mary sat close by, whispering words of comfort to her daughter and occasionally glancing at the cowboy. She wanted to ask him questions to know more about his journey, but she did not dare distract him. Each movement he made was deliberate, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. His face was lined with fatigue, his cheeks red from exposure to the storm, but he moved with the determination of someone who refused to let life slip away. In that room, hope and courage filled the air, overcoming the fear that had gripped them for so long. As the night deepened, Clara's condition began to stabilize. Her breathing, shallow and weak before, became more even. The fever that had burned through her body slowly began to break. The cowboys' careful attention and the medicine from the distant town were working. Mary's hands shook as she helped her daughter sip warm tea, her heart swelling with relief. She dared not speak too loudly, afraid that even a whisper could break the fragile thread of recovery. Yet within the quiet room a sense of victory began to emerge, a quiet triumph born of courage, determination, and the refusal to look away. Outside, the storm continued, but the town remained largely unaware of the life-and-death struggle taking place at its edge. For the first time, some of the townspeople began to notice the smoke curling from the small house and the movement of a figure coming and going in the snow. Whispers began to circulate. Someone had arrived. Someone had acted, but few had the courage to approach. The town had long avoided the weak and the sick, turning eyes away and crossing streets to escape responsibility. Now curiosity mingled with guilt, and a few brave souls peered from windows, wondering what had happened in the house at the edge of town. The cowboy knew the danger was not over. Though Clara was stable for now, the sickness could return and her strength was still weak. He paced around the room, adjusting blankets, checking the medicine, and talking softly to both Clara and her mother. He offered gentle advice to Mary, showing her how to monitor the girl's breathing, how to keep her warm, and how to make her feel safe. Every instruction was clear, practical, and delivered with kindness. Mary absorbed every word, feeling a mixture of gratitude and humility. She had learned more in those few hours than she had in weeks, all because someone had chosen to act when the town had chosen to ignore her daughter. As the hours ticked by, Clara's color began to return. The pale gray of illness slowly shifted to a softer pink, a sign that her body was responding to care and medicine. She stirred slightly, opening her eyes for the first time in hours, and the cowboy smiled gently. "You're doing well," he said. "Stay strong and you'll be better soon." The words seemed simple, but to Clara and her mother they were life-changing. They were a promise that someone cared, that the world had not entirely turned its back. Eventually the storm began to ease. The wind's howl softened. The snow's fury lessened, and a quiet calm settled over the town. Inside the small house, the atmosphere mirrored the change. Clara, still weak, lay more comfortably under her blankets, her breathing steady and less labored. Mary, exhausted but relieved, sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. The cowboy looked around the room, assessing the progress, his mind already planning the next steps to ensure that the girl's recovery continued. He had faced the storm, the snow, and the dangers of the journey, but his task was not complete until the child was safe. By morning, the town began to stir. People noticed the small figure of the cowboy walking away from the house, leading his horse through the cleared snow. Some whispered about the events of the night, others glanced with curiosity and guilt at the smoke rising from the house. The news of the girl's recovery began to spread, first in quiet murmurs, then in more confident voices. The town, which had looked away for so long, now had evidence of the difference one person could make. The contrast between inaction and courage became impossible to ignore. Mary, sitting by her daughter's side, finally allowed herself to breathe fully. She looked at the cowboy, who was preparing to leave, and felt gratitude deeper than words could express. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know how to repay you." The cowboy shook his head. "Just care for her," he said simply. "That's all that matters. You're strong, and you've done your part. I just helped along the way." His words were humble, but they carried the weight of someone who had risked much for the life of a child. Clara, though still weak, managed a faint smile. Her eyes met the cowboy's, and in that small gesture, the depth of hope and trust was clear. She understood, even in her weakened state, that someone had fought for her life when the rest of the town had looked away. That understanding filled her with a warmth stronger than the blankets that surrounded her. It was the beginning of her recovery, both physically and emotionally, a seed of courage and resilience planted in the midst of hardship. Outside, the snow had settled, leaving the streets quiet and glistening. The town, which had once ignored the suffering at its edge, could no longer pretend it had not seen. The tale of the cowboy and the sick girl began to take root, spreading slowly through whispers and conversations. People who had once looked away now felt a pang of shame, realizing that inaction had nearly cost a life. And yet the story also inspired them, showing that courage and compassion could make a real difference. The cowboy mounted his horse, giving a final nod to Mary and Clara. He had done what he set out to do: bring help, provide care, and restore hope. But he knew that the impact of his actions would last far beyond the storm, beyond the snow, and beyond the small house at the edge of town. He rode off into the morning, leaving behind a family that had learned what true kindness and bravery looked like, and a town that would not forget the lesson.
In that house, as the first rays of sunlight touched the snow-covered streets, Clara began to rest peacefully for the first time in days.
Mary stayed beside her, exhausted but filled with gratitude, and the memory of the cowboy's courage burned brightly in her mind. The storm had tested everyone, but it had also revealed the strength of the human spirit, the power of one person to act when others would not. And in that quiet morning, hope had returned, fragile but unbroken, ready to grow stronger with each passing day. The next few days were calm but full of quiet activity in the small house at the edge of town. Clara's fever had finally broken, and though she was still weak, her color had returned, and her breathing was steady. Her small body, once frail and trembling, now had strength returning slowly but surely. Each morning, Mary helped her daughter sip warm teas, fed her soft food, and ensured the blankets were snug against the cold air that still lingered outside. For Mary, every small improvement felt like a miracle, a testament to the courage and determination of the cowboy who had refused to look away. Clara would wake each morning with tired but hopeful eyes, glancing at her mother and whispering a soft, "Is he coming back?" Mary would smile gently, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. "He's done all he could for now," she said. "We are safe, thanks to him. And now we need to take care of each other." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Clara's recovery was not just about medicine or blankets. It was about the sense of being cared for, about trust restored, and hope rekindled. She felt, for the first time in weeks, that she was not alone. Meanwhile, news of the cowboy's actions began to travel quietly through the town. The neighbors who had long ignored the struggles of the small household could no longer avoid the story. Some had seen the figure moving through the snow, heard of the medicine brought from a distant town, and witnessed the determination of a man willing to risk his life to save a child. Whispers turned into conversation, and conversation turned into reflection. Many townspeople felt shame for their earlier indifference, realizing how close tragedy had come to their doorstep. They had looked away, but now they were forced to face the consequences of neglect. The cowboy did not linger in the town for long. He had acted selflessly, without expectation of reward or recognition, and he preferred it that way. But the town could not ignore him completely. Mary wanted to thank him again, to find words that could truly convey her gratitude, but he simply nodded, a humble expression on his face. "Take care of her," he said again, mounting his horse and preparing to ride away. "She's strong, and she has you." Mary's hand shook as she clutched the blankets around Clara, tears of relief and joy running down her cheeks. The presence of someone who had acted when others would not had made all the difference. As the cowboy disappeared into the distance, Clara felt a sense of wonder she could not fully explain. She thought of the snow, the storm, and the cold journey he had faced to help her. She thought of the determination in his eyes, the calm in his voice, and the gentle hands that had cared for her when she had felt weakest. For Clara, the memory of that night would never fade. It was a lesson in courage, compassion, and the power of one person to change the course of another's life. In the days that followed, the town slowly began to change, at least for those who had witnessed or heard of the cowboy's actions. Parents spoke to their children about the importance of helping others. Neighbors visited homes they had once ignored, and a sense of responsibility began to take root. The town had looked away when the girl had fallen, but the bravery of one man reminded them that caring for others was not optional. It was necessary, urgent, and human. Mary, exhausted but grateful, spent each day nurturing Clara, watching the little girl grow stronger with each meal, each sip of warm tea, and each quiet moment of rest. Clara's cough had almost disappeared. Her pale skin glowed with life again, and her tiny fingers were steady as they reached out to hold her mother's hand. The presence of life returning to her daughter filled Mary's heart with relief, but it also brought reflection. She thought of the town, of those who had ignored her cries, and of the lessons they might learn from what had happened. She thought of the cowboy who had arrived like a force of nature, fearless and kind, and she knew that his actions had done more than save a life. They had awakened humanity in a place where it had been dormant. Word of the event reached even the more distant parts of the town. People began to tell the story of the sick girl and the cowboy who ran through the snow to save her. Each telling was slightly different, but the core of the story remained. One person had refused to look away, and one life had been saved. The tale became part of the town's memory, a reminder of courage and kindness that could not be erased. Children whispered about the hero who had ridden through the storm, imagining themselves as brave and strong, inspired by what they had heard. Adults discussed it quietly, reflecting on their own choices, wondering if they had done enough when someone in need had come before them. For Clara, life began to return to a gentle rhythm. She played quietly near the fire, helped her mother with small chores, and slowly regained the energy she had lost. Each day brought small victories. She could walk a little farther, hold a spoon without trembling, and smile at the world with a brightness that had been missing for so long. The memory of the storm, the cold, and the fear lingered, but it was tempered by the knowledge that courage and compassion had triumphed over hardship. The cowboy had not only saved her life, he had given her a sense of hope that would carry her through challenges in the future. Mary often told Clara the story of the cowboy, emphasizing the bravery and selflessness that had made the difference. "Remember," she said softly, "sometimes people will look away when help is needed. But there is always someone who will step forward. That courage can change everything." Clara listened, absorbing the lesson, understanding that she had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the saving of a life, but the awakening of a community's conscience. The town, now aware of its own failings, began to take small steps toward change. Neighbors visited each other more often, offered help to those in need, and learned to notice the struggles that had previously gone unseen. While not everyone changed overnight, the story of the cowboy became a touchstone for compassion. It reminded them that action mattered more than indifference, that caring could transform lives, and that even one person could make a difference in the face of overwhelming odds. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the memory of the storm remained, but it was no longer only a symbol of danger and fear. It became a reminder of hope, of bravery, and of the kindness that had shone in the darkest hours. Clara thrived under her mother's care, her laughter returning to the house and her energy bringing life back to the small home. Mary smiled more freely, her heart lighter, knowing that her daughter's life had been saved by someone who had refused to look away, who had risked everything for the sake of another. Though the cowboy had left, his presence lingered in the hearts of those he had helped. Clara carried the lesson of courage and compassion with her, a memory that would shape her understanding of the world. Mary, too, found a renewed sense of hope, not just for her daughter, but for the town and its people. The story of the brave man who ran through the snow to save a sick girl became a symbol, a narrative repeated quietly in homes, shops, and schools. It reminded everyone that courage, compassion, and action could break through fear, indifference, and hardship. In the quiet evenings that followed, Clara would sit by the window, watching the snow begin to melt, imagining the figure of the cowboy riding through the storm, steadfast and determined. She understood that life could be fragile, that danger could arrive without warning, and that hope often rested in the actions of others. But she also understood that courage was contagious, that it could inspire, and that one act of bravery could ripple through lives in ways that were never fully seen. And so, the small town, once indifferent, began to awaken. Clara recovered fully, her health and spirit restored. Mary's heart found peace, knowing her daughter was safe. And somewhere out on the snowy trails, the cowboy rode onward, unaware of the lives he had changed. His courage a quiet force that would be remembered long after the snow had melted. In the end, the story was simple yet powerful. Even when the world looks away, one person can make all the difference.